Thanks for joining me. We're going to talk about meaning making, belief, and world shaping as core processes in the human niche. We're going to think about human evolution and how humans, over the last 2 million years or so, have modified and restructured what we're going to call the human niche in a way that has enabled meaning making, belief as central components of how humans are in the world. So humans represent an infinitesimally small percentage of all life on this planet. Yet, despite being such a tiny part of the great diversity of living things, humans are among the most significant forces affecting ecosystems and all other life on this planet. Why and how this came to be are two of the most important and pressing questions we can ask about what it means to be human. What I want to lay out here, briefly, is that as the human extensive and distinctive capacities for meaning making, for world shaping, or as you'll see, niche construction, centered on imagination, creativity, and belief, that gives us insight into understanding what humans do and why they do it. So we know a lot about humans. We know, as you can see in this image, that we are derived from a large group of organisms called hominoids, the apes, right? About 10 to 16 million years ago, there was this big range of hominoids. And over the last 10 million years or so, we've seen the hominoids sort of shift and diverge into different lineages. The human lineage were hominoids and then hominids, that is a group of ape-like creatures and apes in Africa, then hominins, right, which is a very specific cluster over the last 4 to 7 million years throughout most of Africa, and today, Homo sapiens. So today, you and I are members of the last living group or representatives of the hominins, but we have this long lineage. So we are part and parcel of the world. Humans are animals, humans are primates, humans are a kind of great ape. But evolution is as much about discontinuities as it is about continuities. So rather than talking about all the things that being part of the primate lineage provides us with, I'm going to focus on distinctive things that happened over the last 2 million years or so in the human lineage. So the punchline for all of this is that over the last 2 million years, members of the genus Homo, us, humans, underwent significant changes in brains, in bodies, and behavior, and they created a new niche, a distinctive way of being in the world. Now, when we think about humans, when we're trying to explain why humans do what they do, for at least the last 500,000, million, or maybe even 2 million years, we need to keep something in mind. Humans almost always exist in a place where there have been humans before them. Social and ecological parameters are impacted by the previous generations, and individuals in subsequent human generations inherit a much larger amount of information than do most other organisms, at least since we started making tools and having really high density quality information transfer. Even when moving into new territories, humans carry some portion of the knowledge of past members of their group with them, both social and material. This provides humans with a broader ability in more ways to respond to challenges through a more diverse array of means than other organisms have available to them. It also might mean that humans can respond at quicker rates than most other complex social organisms, especially when faced with strong selective challenges. It means that humans can come up with multiple effective responses to the same challenges and potentially share them across individuals and groups. That is a critical component of the human niche. So when we think about the last 2 million years, when we think about the development of the human niche, we need to think about human evolution as a process, as a shifting of changing, not just of bones and sort of bodies, but of minds and cultures and behavior and social lives. So becoming human is an ongoing process. So the challenge then of human evolution is to describe this process. So it's not just about the bones, bodies, and anatomical histories. And it's not just about the stones or the sort of material culture, sort of how we manipulated the world. Both of those things are critically important. But the challenge for us here, especially when we're thinking about the sort of broad cognitive mind capacities of humans, we need to think about this challenge of human evolution, not just as bodies, bones, and behavior, but as what happened over the last 2 million years that enabled a group of small, hornless, fangless, clawless, naked, bipedal, ape-like critters who could make some really fascinating sharp stone tools and could use sticks and other things. How do we go from that cluster of organisms to a cluster of organisms that engages and manipulates fire, that spreads across the planet, that begins to imagine the world in new ways and paint cave walls and create figurines, to the kinds of organisms today that make metropolitan expansions, huge cities, global travel networks, and change the entire climate of the planet? How do we go? What is that process to go from sort of a group of organisms that can make Oldowan tools, these sort of sharp-edged stones 2 million years ago, to cave painters and world changers today? That's the challenge of human evolution. So that's what we're going to spend just a brief time sort of thinking about today. So that challenge, then, I would like to suggest is partially explained when we think about the human capacity to move between the reality of what is, right, and the possibility of what could be, socially, psychologically, and technologically. That is, the human has the capacity to look at the world around us, to see the material reality, to creatively, communally imagine new possibilities, and at least try to make those new possibilities a reality. Humans are very creative, and we use our imagination to be so. And these patterns, these possibilities, have an evolutionary history. So this evolutionary history is usually sort of described in a standard format where, as you can see in this image, sort of we go over time with sort of branching tree of different species, right? We know that the Australopithecines from about, let's say 3 to 6 million, 7 million years ago formed this sort of Ardipithecus and Australopithecines, a variety of different kinds of hominins lived and moved around. And from that diversity, right, that we know from the fossil record of hominins, emerged at least one lineage that became us, became the genus Homo. That one lineage, very interestingly, across the Pleistocene, the last 2.5 million years, actually represents an incredibly diverse array of shapes, of bodies, of behaviors, and of use of landscapes. So one thing that is very interesting in understanding the process of human evolution across the Pleistocene is the notion that human evolution is not linear. It is actually morphologically and behaviorally very diverse. There's a lot of dynamic population variation and probably multiple evolutionary processes at play. So diversity is characteristic of the genus Homo. And that's something to keep in mind. Not just biological diversity in the sense of anatomy, right? We see a lot of structural differences in the crania and the postcrania, but a lot of sort of general patterns. So across the Pleistocene, anatomically, we see a lot of diversity across populations in the genus Homo. Another way in which we see a lot of sort of patterns of continuity and diversity is in the tools. The earliest tools, about 3.3 million years ago, stone tools that is, were made before the genus Homo appears on the scene. These early stone tools were very large stones that were crudely flaked and created into edged instruments. But by about 2 million years ago, we start to see these Oldowan tools become rather refined, sort of this different level of tool creation. And then we see, over the last 2 million years, consistent, sometimes gradual, sometimes quick, changes in the sort of structural context, the makeup, and the design of these stone tools. So across the Pleistocene, we see sort of continuity in some portions of the toolkit, but increasing diversity and increasing complexity over the time as the human niche draws closer to the current day and becomes more and more filled with complexity and diversity. Now, we know there are very interesting connections between tool making, tool use, and teaching and learning. So even the simplest Oldowan stone tools are not just pick up a rock and flake it. Even the earliest stone tools characterizing the genus Homo, the Oldowan, and then some of the earliest Schulian technologies, involve a kind of shared communication, involve a kind of learning and shaping and teaching, a kind of deep communication that we don't see in any other organism on the planet. Other organisms use tools, some even make and modify simple tools, but humans have a deep history of seeing a stone, realizing conceptually that in that stone was another possibility in multiple shapes, communicating that to one another, and collaborating and working together to refine that, to hone that, and to augment it and complexify it over time. So tool use over the last 2 million years in genus Homo is a cognitive process that is imaginative and communicative. And the feedback between teaching, learning, and creation of these tools has clearly documented neuroendocrinological changes, right? Work by Dietrich Stout and many others have shown that the processing and learning and acquisition of the skill set around making, sharing, and using tools has particular connections to potential changes in the neuroendocrine system, which have downstream facilitations for other kinds of neurobiological, behavioral, and physiological changes that we see. So tool making is not the only thing humans did importantly and fascinatingly, but tool making sets a stage and provides us one opportunity for understanding how we have this expanded sort of world of communication, of sharing, of learning and teaching. At the same time, over the last 2 million years, particularly by about 1.5 to 1 million years ago, we see that human, genus Homo, collaboration and cooperation have really ratcheted up in a few areas. For example, there's robust evidence that we have what we could call cooperative caretaking, right? That is, parenting, the raising of young, is a mutual effort by multiple members of the group, not just the mother, not just one or two individuals. This kind of intensive collaborative cooperative focus enables a space for the young members of the genus Homo to expand upon their developmental trajectory. And we slow down and expand up and out the pattern and pace of development, whereas human infants become born with the majority of their neurobiological development and even just sort of morphological growth of the brain happening postpartum, that is outside the mother in the social landscape. And this is more so than any other organism that we know of. So this cooperation, collaboration in collaborative caretaking and parenting is extremely important. Around the same time, we also see shifting ecological use. We see increasing diversity in forage targets. We see by about 500,000 to 1 million years ago, the emergence of fire as a component in human technologies and materials and cultures. We see rapidly increasing and augmenting complexity in tool technologies. And we see by 3, 4, 500,000 years ago, good evidence of complex relationships within groups, between groups within larger populations, including the possibility of collaboration and exchanges. All right, that's a lot of information that I just laid out on the table, but it's extremely important. So the human niche, as you can see in this image, is documented. We know when many different events initially began, and we can track them and show this incredible accumulation. So what does it distinctively human niche look like? Well, there's a substantial expansion in brain size and neurological plasticity. There's expanded cultural innovation via the manipulation of extrasomatic, that is the outside the body world. There's an accumulation of cultural complexity, right, including material technology and a sort of ratcheting process. There's increasing complexity to cooperation. There's an interdependence between ecological, cognitive, and neural systems. There's the emergence of a language-ready brain. When language emerges, that's a whole other thing, but it does eventually. And there really is the development of this distinctive sociocognitive niche and an immersion in a ubiquitous semiotic ecosystem, as Terence Deacon has called it. So understanding all of this niche highlights why the neuroanthropologists Greg Downey and Daniel Lendy tell us that our brain and nervous system are cultural organs, right? Neuroanatomy that has evolved over this process makes experience material. Neural systems adapt through long-term refinement and modeling, which leads to sort of learning, memory, maturation. It's through systematic change to the nervous system over this evolutionary process that humans not just begin to orchestrate their body, but their social lives and their cultural concepts even become anatomy. So across this time period, It's not just the tools, the use of fire, the expanded foraging context that's most important in telling here. The human niche, this process of Pleistocene evolution that characterizes the genus Homo, also gave rise to an incredible capacity for meaning making. Now, here I intentionally do not use the term symbol. Mark Kissel and I have published on this and talked about this in other senses, but a symbol is a very specific, culturally based and contextualized definition. Here I'm talking about meaning making, about objects that are infused with meaning, that are created because they elicit particular perceptual and sensory responses, and they do so again and again. That is, they are made multiple times in the same ways, and they elicit the same kinds of perceptual and sensory responses. We see this early in a few isolated cases, but by 400,000 or 500,000 years ago, we're starting to see examples for something like clamshells with doodles on them, found in Java between 400,000 and 500,000 years ago. By 200,000 to 300,000 years ago, we see evidence of ochres, of pigments, right, mineral pigments that have been scraped and created into powder, probably used for their coloring on bodies or on tools. But also we start to see designs carved in these colored rocks. We see shell beads by about 120,000, 130,000 years ago. We see carvings and markings on walls and eggshells and bones by 120 to 80,000 years ago. We see cave art by 65,000 years ago, figurines by 45,000 years ago, etc., etc. So this, as you can see on this map that I've just shown, this sort of over the last 400,000 years, what we see is repeated and increasingly dense evidence for members of the genus Homo, that is humans, infusing the world with meaning, taking material items, reshaping them, not so that they can cut or chop or serve some function directly like that, but rather because they derive or create the stimulus for perceptual or sensory response, meaning making. So, as Ashley Montagu said almost 50 years ago, pointing out what is so significant about the human, the environment humans make for themselves is created through their symbol-using ability, their capacity for abstraction. The symbols, the ideas are created in the mind, but the human animal learns not only to create them, but to project them onto the external world and there transform them into reality. Again, as I said before, humans can look at the world around them, see the material reality and experiential reality of the world, use their creativity, imagination, collaboration, communication to come up with new possibilities and try to make them reality. That is the distinctive socio-cognitive niche of humans, and it is central to our understanding. Now, my final point here is that this process is well documented. There's lots of data anatomically, materially, and theoretically that sort of give us this shaping. But it really is, all of this comes together, I would argue, to produce a capacity for belief. Now, belief is the ability to combine histories and experiences with imagination, to think beyond the here and now. It enables humans to see and feel and know an idea that is not immediately present to the senses, and then wholly invest in making that idea one's reality. Belief is a full commitment in this sense. And I would argue that it emerges somehow along the lines I'm going to outline right here. Diversity and complexity, from bodies to behavior in social structures and intergroup relationships, characterizes the genus Homo across the Pleistocene with increasing intensity as we draw closer to contemporary times. Feedback systems between behavior, ecologies, cognitive and bodily systems via learning, teaching, and communicating are central in the human niche, and they form a central focus of the dynamics of being human. So creativity, cooperation, and imagination coming together created this capacity for meaning making. And meaning making, once in place, combines with imagination, communication, creativity in these evolving human communities that are so central to the human niche. And that combination facilitates belief, the ability to come up with shared ideas, intentions, imaginings, and commit to them wholly and make them our reality. That is what humans do. So human evolution, in a nutshell, involves genes and brains and bodies, ecologies and ecosystem dynamics. Of course, those are the traditional places we focus when talking about human evolution. But human evolution, the human niche, also involves imagination, belief, and the shared creation of human place. In human evolution, ideas, experiences, and beliefs can be as important as bones, muscles, genes, and neurons. To understand what it means to be human and why we are where we are right now, all of this has to come together. Something to think with.